So people are just going to continue to join us. We'll give them a couple of minutes to do that. But whilst we're doing so, I think I can start maybe in explaining some of the technical elements of the webinar. So first of all, welcome to everybody who's slowly joining us to this webinar that's organised by the SWIFT project and ECVC on gender responsive budgeting. I'll let our facilitator explain a bit more, but I just wanted to make a few technical points. So first of all, the webinar is going to be recorded. So that recording is happening now. Second of all, there will be interpretation in the meeting. So the webinar will happen in English, French and Spanish. And I'll explain how to access the interpretation in 3 languages just in case people don't know how to do that. So at the bottom, there's a small globe that says interpretation, and then you can choose the language that you want to listen to. And there will be interpretation in English, French and Spanish, as I said. Entonces, si explico rápido en español, que abajo hay un pequeño globo para elegir el idioma que quieres escuchar. Si das en el globo, ahí eliges el idioma que quieres escuchar y así habrá interpretación. Et donc en français, vite fait, en bas, il y a un petit globe pour choisir la langue d'interprétation. Vous pouvez cliquer dessus, vous pouvez choisir la langue que vous voulez écouter et comme ça, on a l'interprétation dans la réunion. If there are any technical problems with interpretation or anything else, you can write a message to me and I'll try and fix that in the background. Also, just to say, we encourage you strongly to put any questions that you might have during the webinar in the chat. We'll be collecting those and sorting and going through them. We will try at the end to also maybe give the floor to a few people, depending on the questions that are put on the chat and the time that we have. And if we manage to do that, we really ask people to be quite concise and precise with their comments or questions so that we can get through as many questions as possible. I think from the technical side, that's everything. So I will give the floor to our facilitator Jessica, to introduce the webinar. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Alicia. So on behalf of the SWIFT project, I really want to welcome you today to our webinar to raise awareness about gender responsive budgeting, or what we call GRB, for agricultural policy in the EU. This webinar has been organized by ECVC, the European Coordination of La Via Campesina. My name is Jessica Duncan, and I'm a researcher at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and it's my pleasure to moderate today. So 2026 is the International Year of the Female Farmer, and this is not by accident. Despite the critical roles that women play in rural communities and on farms, their contributions, skill, labor, and knowledge often go under-recognized or unrecognized. These inequalities extend to how we fund projects and what we fund. The ways that budgets are designed, what we decide to pay for and fund and not fund, has important implications for gender equality, also in agriculture. And this is what we're going to focus on today. And the timing is critical. As we look towards the new multi-annual financial framework, or the MFF, and the CAP post-2027, we see an important focus on gender equality and gender budgeting. But what does this mean? How does it work? And how can it be implemented? How is it experienced on the ground? Our speakers today will address these questions. So let me introduce our speakers to you very briefly. From the SWIFT project, we have Louise Legein from OXFAM, Belgium, who's going to explain what gender responsive budgeting, or GRB, is and how it relates to the current policy environment. Then, to help us understand gender mainstreaming in the post-2027 MFF, we have Elena Schubert from DG-AGRI Unit for Social Sustainability. And Elena is very active in these processes and can explain the Commission's perspective to us. We then move from the European level to the national level. Tania Lucía Benito is joining us from the Spanish Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Food. She will explain how Spain has promoted gender equality in the agri-food sector. And then Kirsten Eckstein I hope, Kristen, I got that right. From UBV, a member of ECVC, will offer a farmer perspective and insights into gender budgeting from Austria. So our goal today is not just to talk about the what, but very much to dive into the how. How do we turn policy intentions into farm level impact and advance gender equality? So let's begin by exploring what we mean by GRB. Louise, I invite you to give your presentation and intervention.
Yes, thank you. So, Margaret, are you sharing the presentation? Okay. Okay, I can already start. So, as Jessica was presenting, so I work at OXFAM and my name is Louise, and I will present you what we have done on gender responsive budgeting in the SWIFT project. So first, what is the SWIFT project? It's an EU-funded project with the objective of advancing the position of women and LGBTQIA+ people in farming. It comes from a demand from women farmers of ECVC, so the European Coordination of La Via Campesina. And we try to have an approach that is feminist and human rights based. And finally, we look at agroecology as a potential to improve gender equality. More specifically, in this project, I worked on work package 5. So it was co-led by OXFAM and Wageningen University with the objective of looking at how to advance gender responsive policymaking. Yes. So OXFAM was involved in the project to bring knowledge from the Global South on gender responsive budgeting. We also build on existing initiatives in Europe and experience from farmers of the project. We also based our work on policy analysis made by Wageningen, and all of this allowed us to produce a manual on how to make CAP more gender transformative. So the first two reports here on the slide are the policy analysis made by Wageningen, and then the third one is the how-to manual I was talking about. On the next slide, you can also see a picture from the comics we produced to illustrate the policy dialogues we had around gender responsive budgeting and the CAP. So what was in this manual? If you want to know more about it, you can find it on the website, but I will summarize the main ideas here. So first, we identified that norms were most of the time at the basis of the inequalities we were studying. So mainly gender norms, heterosexual norms, racism, and that global and European agriculture was based on exploitation. Then we moved to look at gender responsive budgeting. Yeah, you can put the next slide. Perfect. So what is gender responsive budgeting? In a few words, it's looking at the budget and the policies around funding to reduce social inequalities and achieve gender equality. It's really interesting because you look at what is actually spent and not what is promised in a way when you only look at policies. It's not limited to women and gender, and it has to be done at each step of the budgetary process. So design, approval, implementation, monitoring. And finally, it helps having a more efficient budget management. So it's not only about gender, it's really an interesting tool in general. Then in the manual I was talking about, we looked at the current situation. And as I guess most of you know, there are many levels at which the CAP is regulated. So we have the DMFF just was talking about. Then you have two funds that are financing the CAP. Then you have the CAP regulations. And finally, you have the CAP national strategy plans. For the MFF, there is gender budgeting. So it's called gender budgeting, but according to our definition, you will see there are still some gaps. So it's based on scores from 0 to 2, but it does not look at the whole budgetary process. And there is no indication on the effectiveness of the interventions. But it's still interesting because since you have those scores that have to be given, data were collected and gaps in gender awareness were identified. Then we can move to the two funds financing the CAP. So there is no mention of gender mainstreaming or budgeting in the legal text, but there is potential because beneficiaries from the CAP have to be published. It doesn't need to be disaggregated by gender, but it could be. Also, it's a bit blurry sometimes when it talks about gender. For example, it says that bodies responsible for gender equality have to be involved where relevant. So we don't really know if it's going to happen or not and who is going to decide what is relevant. Then for the regulations establishing the rules for CAP strategic plan, again, there is nothing really compulsory, but there is potential to implement gender budgeting. First, member states are encouraged to assess the situation of women in farming. It's in general at the beginning of the strategic plans, talking about the current situation of agriculture in that particular member state. And then you have impact indicators and results indicators in the strategic plans, and 3 of them mention that it should include a gender breakdown, which is also promising. Then we move to how to successfully apply gender-responsive budgeting to the CAP. We made a lot of recommendations in the manual, and here are the main takes. So it's really important to implement gender-responsive budgeting at local, national, and European level. At local level, it helps people getting familiar with the tool. And because the CAP is regulated at member state and European level, it's also important to have gender budgeting at both levels to make sure it's consistent. It's also really important to take structural inequalities into account when you design the CAP interventions. For that, you need to consult underrepresented people, to collect relevant data, to support studies, to document those inequalities. Currently, there are impact and result indicators. If it's still the case in the next CAP, and in any case, I think there will be indicators. So it's important to integrate gender considerations when you design them. And finally, one really important aspect is to train civil servants and policymakers on GRB, because they are the ones who are going to be responsible for implementing gender-responsive budgeting. And if they don't see the point of doing it, they won't do it and nothing will happen. So that's it for me now. And I will leave the room for the next.
Thank you so much, Louise. That was a great overview of gender-responsive budgeting and the current situation. I really appreciated how much you highlighted the experience that already exists around gender-responsive budgeting, and also the importance of norms, and how these social norms translate into things we may not immediately consider to be gendered, like budgets. the multi-level approach is also critical, and that's what we're trying to do here at this webinar by bringing in people from these different levels. And the importance of training and how we kind of convince policymakers or what policymakers think about this. And for that, I think we can segue very nicely to Elena Schubert from DG-AGRI, who's here to share with us the Commission's position, and especially what's happening around gender-responsive budgeting and gender budgeting for the next MFF and the next CAP. Thank you, Elena.
Elena, you need to open your mic.
Can you hear me now? Because I could not open mic. It was not possible to open. My other question is, I have a presentation here, so I will kindly encourage the kind colleague of mine who would then move on with the slides. Yeah, I will just say the next slide. So I think we can already start with the first slide if you move further. And I'm not going to speak. I'm going to speak to the point, right? So first of all, we have my previous speaker has already talked about gender equality and how it's going to be covered. So let me, perhaps there will be some repetitions, just to let you know that gender equality as a priority has been put forward based on a impact assessment that we have carried out in the Commission before we tabled the proposal. And how this impact assessment has been carried out? Well, it took into account the lessons learned from the previous programming period, but also the programming periods before. We have been implementing gender equality for a longer time in the Commission and across many programs. So we have vast experience with that. And the proposal that I'm going to talk about today from the perspective of gender equality is indeed the result of this vast experience that we have with the implementation of gender equality. And the experience has taught us that the key for the success of implementation of gender equality is a harmonized approach towards gender equality, and obviously a simplified approach, because if we want member states to implement it in an effective and obviously also efficient manner, we need to have tools that enable rather simple but effective implementation. So post-27 multi-annual financial framework assessment assessed the options, among others, on gender mainstreaming. And it confirmed that we need to have this harmonized approach. If we can move to the next slide, please. The next MFF proposal is compositions of various regulations. For the purpose of gender equality, I would like to draw your attention to the performance regulation, because performance regulation sets rules and a sort of single and simple guidance for the whole budget, including common agricultural policy budget. And in this regard, it's worthwhile to look particularly at Articles 7, 13, 16, and 17. Yeah, I have prepared these slides because I think that for those of you who would like to get back to that and study those articles in detail, this is an important reference. Also, please have a look closer at Recital 8 and Article 7, because this concerns the data collection. And as we have already been doing, for example, under Common Agricultural Policy in the current programming period, we have been collecting data disaggregated by gender, in a way, male, women, non-binary, prefer not to say. And we are going to continue in this manner by gender disaggregated data post-2027. And when you want to see the details, and I'm not going to go into details now during my presentation, about the methodology, then please have a very carefully at Article 7. And when you read Article 7, you will find out that we make use of OECD methodology, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which uses the scores when it comes to budget tracking for women, for gender equality. And that means we have simplified the methodology, and we use only 3 scores, and that is score 1, 2, and 0. Score 2 means for all the interventions that have gender equality as a principal objective. Score 1 is for all those interventions where gender equality is not the main objective, but it contributes to the enhancement of gender equality. And score 0 is for all those interventions which have basically no substantial contribution to gender equality. Okay, so this is an important slide. This is the legislative references under performance regulation. And here you have also explanation what the gender tracking methodology means and how this will be translated as we will implement the specific interventions under the multi-annual financial framework 2027, post-2027. Next slide, please. Yes, so here you see with help of this visual tool that I have that I have introduced on this slide. So first of all, the basic principle is gender equality is going to be implemented in a consistent way across all EU budget. And the rules for its implementation will be universal for the all EU budget, not fragmented like it was the case before, because we have learned from the past that we need to have a universal and simple application of the rules. There, we will have these horizontal gender mainstream provisions that I have been talking about in my previous slide. And then we will have also program-specific provisions. So that means, of course, we will have programs that will operate under the direct management mode. And obviously, there they have the gender equality as criteria, for example, for evaluation of calls. This is not the case for common agricultural policies. Here we are talking about indirect management programs. And those programs and the implementation of gender equality will be very much aligned with the performance regulation legislative provisions that I have talked as I was on my previous slide. Member states and third country partnership plans, this is not relevant for the purpose of this seminar, but I included this reference here. So for the sake of the whole picture that I would like to you to have after this presentation. How the monitoring and tracking is going to be happening. So we are going to have a single system to track EU expenditure and results. Single system. So there will be codification of the gender tracking methodology, the scores. There will be intervention fields that will be provided, and there will be a common list of performance indicators. And there will be indicators which will be desegregated by gender. By the way, we are already doing this for common agricultural policy under the current programming period. Next slide, please. So if we are going to look into more detail, we know you know very well that we are going to implement the next MFF primarily via national regional partnership programs. And member states will of course work on those programs. They will draft these programs, and under the partnership principle, they will include all the stakeholders that are relevant for drafting of the specific chapters within these national regional partnership programs. And what is important here, that each activities in the plans has to be in some way indicated. How does it contribute to gender equality? This is the famous Article 13 that I have already referred to. They will have to provide a very clear explanation of the expected impact on gender equality. And they will have to assign a gender score. Remember, 0, 1, 2. This is defined in Article 7 of the performance regulations. This assessment must be provided when member states submit the national regional partnership programs to the Commission. And if they don't provide this assessment, then we will automatically assign score 0 to the interventions. So it is in the interest of member states to do so. The Commission then, once the member states will have submitted their national regional partnership programs, the Commission will evaluate the plans and the content, obviously, of these plans, and it will make sure that those plans are in compliance with the performance regulation. Okay, the performance regulation is the key when it comes to the definition of how gender equality is going to be implemented. And this is not relevant for the purpose of common agricultural policy, and yet I would like to say that also the criteria for the evaluation of proposals, for example, when it comes to direct management, this will also be valid for direct management programs. So to sum up, so member states will prepare the plans, they will assign the scores, and then the ball is in the hands of the Commission, which will carry out the assessment and see whether this makes sense or it doesn't make sense. And then, of course, we'll invite member states to get back, to revise, and we will discuss in a number of technical meetings that we will have with member states. Next slide, please. So what does it specifically mean for common agriculture policy post-2027? So, as I said, when it comes to the expenditure tracking for gender equality, we are already doing it. We are applying this OECD methodology. If you would kindly go back to this slide. Because we are now on the slide number 1, and we would like to go, yes, thank you very much. So we are already doing this. For example, we know that for financing year 2024, 15% of CAP income support was granted to women farm managers, and that is, and women represent roughly 31% of beneficiaries. So this is a really good indicator to see that even though women are 1/3 of the beneficiaries, when it comes to CAP support, it's minimal. It's definitely not 1/3. This is a very good and telling indicator, right? That we see, okay, so the women are really in minority when it comes to the direct payments. And SWIFT projects participants know it because we have discussed this already in Brussels during the seminar some months ago. Also, when we look at the CAP proposal, we made sure that women are specifically mentioned, and they are mentioned in Article 6, which is very clear about that women are disadvantaged when it comes to their role in agriculture, in farming, and also in rural economy, and they need to be specifically targeted when it comes to the support by CAP. So this is explicitly singled out in Article 6, along with Article 17, which is dedicated to farm relief services. We think this creates quite a good basis for member states to design the interventions specifically for women. I think these two articles on top of all the provisions that you will find in the legal provisions of the national regional partnership programs as well as performance regulations, this provides a solid basis for member states to invest into gender equality for the sake of the common agricultural policy. Is there a next slide, please, or is it the last slide? No, that was the last slide, as I was suspecting. So I wanted to be brief. I didn't want to speak more. You see the references to the basic legal provisions that are there. It's for your information. I would like to ask organizers, in case of interest, to share those slides with the participants. I'll be very happy to respond to your questions in case you have some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. It's such a pleasure to hear your perspective, also because it is such a dynamic moment and things are moving so quickly. So we appreciate the clarity that you bring to the discussion. And also to hear that you're learning so much from experiences of the past. I appreciated also the reference to the performance regulations. And for those of us who are policy nerds, that's a very welcome contribution. It was also, I think, insightful to learn that you're incentivizing action by assigning a score of 0 when member states don't do the work of assigning a score to their policy programs. And I think that's an exciting thing to look forward to and to see how that rolls out. And it also leads us very nicely to our next speaker, because we all know that we can decide things at the level of the Commission, but then it gets translated into these plans. And so to learn about what happens through that process and how member states are working on questions of gender equality and agriculture, I'd like to invite Tania Lucía Benito, who's joining us from the Spanish Ministry of Agriculture, Fishery and Foods, to explain how Spain has been promoting gender equality in the agri-food sector. And I understand, Tania, you'll be speaking to us in Spanish. So a reminder, you can find interpretation at the bottom under the globe if you haven't chosen it already. Thank you, Tania. Go ahead.
Hola, buenos días. Muchas gracias, Jessica. Y sí, voy a hacer la presentación en español porque así me siento más cómoda y lo podré explicar con más claridad. Muchas gracias por compartir la presentación. Si os parece, voy también diciéndote cuándo pasar. Un poco la idea de esta intervención es presentar el caso de España, las actuaciones que estamos desarrollando para promover la igualdad de género en el sector agrario en concreto desde el Ministerio de Agricultura en España. Tanto actuaciones con fondos europeos como actuaciones con fondos nacionales, exclusivamente nacionales. Ya podemos pasar a la primera diapositiva. Bueno, esto sin extenderme mucho, simplemente es por poner en contexto el marco en el que estamos, sin entrar mucho en detalle en los datos. Ya se ha comentado por las participantes anteriores la importancia de los datos precisamente para poder diseñar las políticas adecuadas y luego evaluarlas. Y también la dificultad que muchas veces nos encontramos para encontrar estos datos desagregados por sexo. Cada vez están más disponibles, pero bueno, sigue habiendo limitaciones. Aquí pongo algunos ejemplos de los principales datos que pueden mostrar las brechas que existen en España, que luego si comparamos con los datos a nivel europeo muestran una tendencia muy similar. O sea, los datos muestran prácticamente las mismas brechas, salvando los condicionantes territoriales, las diferencias territoriales de unos estados a otros, se ven las mismas brechas en general. La participación de las mujeres sigue siendo menor en la actividad agraria de la población activa en nuestro país. En torno al 28% son mujeres. De la población activa que se dedica, de las personas que se dedican a la actividad agraria, en torno al 28% son mujeres. Si ya hablamos de titulares de explotación, según en esta gráfica de la derecha podéis ver la evolución en los últimos años. Según datos del último censo agrario, se sitúa en un 32%, que está en línea con la media de la Unión Europea. Y esto muestra que las mujeres están menos presentes en la titularidad y también sus explotaciones tienen características distintas, tienen menos rentabilidad, menor dimensión tanto física como económica. En el caso de España, la superficie agraria útil media de las explotaciones de mujeres está en 18 hectáreas frente a las 30 hectáreas de las explotaciones de también una rentabilidad inferior, en torno a un 32% inferior a las explotaciones gestionadas por mujeres, en términos medios todo. Entonces, esta menor dimensión de las explotaciones también condiciona el menor acceso muchas veces a las ayudas que están ligadas muchas veces también a esta dimensión. En el caso de nuestro país, según datos del 2024, el 37% de los beneficiarios de las ayudas directas eran mujeres y recibían, en término medio, importes menores. A ver, os digo el dato. Creo que en torno a un 32% inferiores de media los importes. Y también tienen menor presencia en las ayudas de desarrollo rural. Y bueno, aquí solamente también para señalar otro aspecto importante, que es la menor presencia de mujeres en los puestos de toma de decisión. No tenemos datos, pero los datos no tenemos datos globales, quiero decir, tenemos algunos datos. Por ejemplo, datos de cooperativas agroalimentarias, por lo importante que son para el sector, vemos que tan solo en puestos directivos hay un 12,8% de las personas que ocupan puestos directivos en cooperativas son mujeres. Que nos puede también dar una idea de, pues, de la brecha que existe en este sentido. Ya podemos pasar a la siguiente diapositiva. Aquí os queríamos presentar el trabajo que hacemos desde el Ministerio de Agricultura para promover la igualdad de género. En nuestro caso, yo concretamente trabajo en el área que llamamos de mujeres rurales, de apoyo a las mujeres rurales y del sector agrario. Entonces, nuestras actuaciones son específicamente dirigidas a mujeres, o sea, presupuesto íntegramente dirigido a ese objetivo. Trabajamos en distintas líneas para tratar de atender los retos que hemos identificado como prioritarios. Os lo comento rápido para no extenderme demasiado, pero para que lo conozcáis. Uno de los ámbitos en los que trabajamos es en el mejorar el conocimiento existente, como hemos comentado. Hemos hecho algunos análisis de las estadísticas existentes para ver dónde había lagunas, dónde se podía mejorar la información, y también estudios específicos que permiten hacer un diagnóstico más concreto de la situación en la que nos encontramos. El último lo publicamos el año pasado, que hace un análisis del censo y se completa con encuestas específicas. Otro de los ámbitos importantes es actuaciones para promover la participación de las mujeres en el sector agrario. Aquí luego lo quiero comentar un poquito más en detalle en las siguientes diapositivas. Sobre todo, un hito súper importante fue la inclusión de la igualdad de género de forma específica en la PAC en el periodo que está actualmente en vigor, que en nuestro país sí que se han desplegado medidas en este sentido que luego comentaré. Comentaros que, bueno, que este año se va a abordar la evaluación del PPAC español, del Plan Nacional Español, desde la perspectiva de género. O sea que también a finales de año finales de este año, principios del siguiente, podremos tener información relevante en este sentido. Y luego otra de las actuaciones que llevamos a cabo, que también comentaré, es de ámbito normativo, que en España se instauró hace ya 15 años una ley que busca visibilizar y profesionalizar el trabajo de las mujeres en el sector agrario. Luego comento con más detalle también. Y bueno, comentaros que este año estamos creando un grupo focal de mujeres en la actividad agraria que busca juntar expertos de distintos ámbitos, académico, administración, propio sector, entidades representativas de distintos ámbitos del sector agrario, para debatir en conjunto la situación existente, la información que ya tenemos, las necesidades, priorizarlas, intentar identificar actuaciones que podamos llevar a cabo para mejorar la situación y conseguir avanzar en términos de igualdad. Otro de los ámbitos se refiere a promover la participación de las mujeres en la toma de decisiones y en el emprendimiento, tanto en el medio rural en su conjunto, pero con una mirada muy específica al sector agroalimentario, porque sectorialmente por el Ministerio en el que nos encontramos. Llevamos a cabo programas de formación, de asesoramiento, de mentorización dirigidos a emprendedoras rurales. No me extiendo más en estos tipos de programas, pero bueno, sí que hemos identificado que son muy importantes, que las mujeres los valoran muy positivamente para avanzar en sus proyectos y sobre todo la generación de redes entre ellas, la creación de redes entre ellas. Y luego el cuarto bloque es actuaciones de visibilización para mostrar referentes, para visibilizar el trabajo que las mujeres hacen y mostrar referentes del trabajo que llevan a cabo, de proyectos destacados. Tenemos unos premios que entregamos anualmente desde 2010, que se premian proyectos llevados a cabo por mujeres en el medio rural con una categoría específica para el sector agrario y luego también para otro tipo de actividades del medio rural. También tenemos otro tipo de actividades de difusión que promueven la concienciación sobre el papel de las mujeres en el medio rural, en el sector agrario, para ver pues eso, su situación y sus necesidades, como un ciclo de cine de mujeres rurales y actuaciones en centros educativos. Y ya la siguiente diapositiva. Bueno, quería comentar dos actuaciones, más detalle, las que se dirigen específicamente al sector agrario, que son la inclusión de la igualdad de género en la PAC, en el caso español, que en nuestro caso, dada esta posibilidad que se introdujo con la inclusión de la perspectiva de género como un objetivo específico, se han desplegado actuaciones tanto en el primer pilar, dentro de las ayudas directas, En el primer pilar, en el pago complementario a personas jóvenes que se instalan, la ayuda que va por el primer pilar se da un 15%, se incrementa en un 15% el importe cuando la persona que se instala es una mujer. Y en el caso del FEADER, del fondo FEADER, las actuaciones financiadas con este fondo, en nuestro país está regionalizado. Entonces, cada comunidad autónoma, cada región, en base a sus necesidades, establece una serie de intervenciones y es aquí donde pueden establecer prioridades a las mujeres, ya no solamente a través de los criterios de priorización, como era la vía más clásica, sino también con condiciones de elegibilidad específicas, mayores importes o mayor proporción de ayuda. Entonces, de las 45 intervenciones que tenemos en nuestro programa estratégico, 39 tienen algún tipo de consideración en cuanto al género. Ya sea, bueno, depende de las regiones, muy variado, sobre todo en intervenciones de instalación de jóvenes agricultores, modernización de explotaciones, líder, son las que más, en las que más regiones se han tenido en cuenta estos aspectos. Y luego, ya la siguiente. Esta es otra iniciativa, esta es nacional, con fondos nacionales también para comentaros, pues eso, es una iniciativa de ámbito legislativo. También compartido con otros países de nuestro entorno está el problema que las mujeres sí que están en el sector, pero su trabajo no es visible ni profesionalizado. No se considera una continuación de la ayuda familiar en las explotaciones. Entonces, para profesionalizar este trabajo, para promover que se profesionalice, se puso en marcha esta ley de titularidad compartida de las explotaciones agrarias, que lo que hace es poner en igualdad a ambos titulares en cuanto a derechos y obligaciones, en cuanto a gestión de la explotación y los beneficios que pueden derivarse de ella, y representación también, o sea, cuentan igual. Entonces, es para sacar a la luz ese trabajo de las mujeres que ya están realizando y que puedan disfrutar de sus derechos. Esta ley va despacio, la implantación de esta ley, pero bueno, sigue avanzando y se trabaja en una serie de incentivos para promover esta figura, para promover los beneficios asociados que lleva esta figura. Entonces, bueno, este era un poco el resumen y luego si tenéis preguntas que queráis hacer, pues encantada de atenderlas.
Thank you so much. That was a very clear and insightful presentation. I appreciated, again, how you reinforced the importance of, in this case, sex disaggregated data, but we'll be moving towards gender disaggregated data, so that's already important. And the importance of ensuring the role of women's participation in decision-making, and also this importance of visualization, making it visible the work that women are doing. And what I really take away is how important the legal frameworks are. So it's more than just policy. It's how do member states actually bring this into legal processes. So there's a lot to learn and take away from the case of Spain. I'm very curious to watch how these get translated into the next stage, into the NRPs for the next post-2027 context. And now to kind of understand how all of this translates to the farm level, Kirsten, sorry, I'd like to invite you to give your presentation. You'll be speaking to us in English, I understand, right?
Yes.
Welcome.
I hope the presentation is now to be seen. Okay. Yeah, I'm not only a farmer, but also a social scientist with experience of gender budgeting in higher education. So I'm happy to be able to share this combined perspective with you today. In Austria, we have a very good legal framework, not only coming from the EU framework, but also because we have the gender responsive budgeting in the Austrian constitution anchored since 2009, and with a big reform of the budget process, budget management process that was introduced in 2013. This becomes an outcome-orientated approach. This requires all federal ministries and bodies like parliament or all ministries to define a maximum of 5 outcome objectives for the annual budget. So this was this really outcome-oriented approach. And one of these 5 objectives must relate to gender equality. So the ministries must also specify measures and activities and indicators to achieve and evaluate these objectives. And there's also a big monitoring online available. The objective for the sector of agricultural ministry is reducing gender inequalities and in agriculture and forestry with a focus on schools and the proportion of female farm managers. When you look at the monitoring, and this is yearly reported, then you can see that this indicator with balanced gender ratio of students in secondary agricultural and forestry schools is kind of over-fulfilled because the target value rises from 45% some years ago to 49% female in 2024. And we have under all students and graduates, over 50% female students. So you can say, okay, this is a very equal situation. But if you look deeper, then you can see that there's a significant segregation by school type, kind of focus of the schools. So schools with a forestry focus are mainly with male students, and those schools with household management and nutrition topics are more visited by female students. So you see that it's not enough just to put all those data together, all these school types, because then you cannot see which kind of segregation is under this sum. The other indicator is maintaining the comparatively to EU level. We have a comparatively high proportion of female farm managers. The target value was set to 30% female. And in 2024, we had 35% female farm managers and 65% male. There has to be assigned one person as a farm manager, even if there are, if it's kind of shared farm management by a couple. So there's no possibility to say that both are together managers, or also in community managed farms. And here I think there's a good example what gender responsive budgeting analysis can provide, revealing an imbalance, because if we look at the subsidies, the first pillar, then we see in the SWIFT analysis that 28% of the subsidies go to female-led farms and 72% to male-led farms. And there's this difference between 35 female farm managers, but only 28% of the subsidies. This makes important and deeper look to the data. If we look at an typical or the mean of the male farm managers, they have 36 hectares, of female only 21 hectares. So the smaller farms are often more often led by females, and also the livestock units or the mean subsidies are with significant differences between male and female farm leaders. This is the point with the indicators, objectives indicators, and the reporting about that. which is important to talk about gender and gender budgeting. Another important point from my point of view is that we have different perspectives in this gender responsive budgeting process. Some of them were mentioned before in the presentations. I have this slide with the three main perspectives. The first one is that we have a look, what is the direct impact of the money which is distributed? Yeah, who gets the money? This is often reported by the farm manager, or the people who will get the money. I have one example. If we have some investments in freight routes, then we can ask or report who gets the money for the construction of the freight routes, who is the farmer or the owner of the land, who will get the subsidy. Another important point, mainly in the cases where at first glance we cannot see is there a gender impact of something which is financed, then we can also ask who will be paid with the funds, which companies will get money for building something, or we can ask who will use this path, who will use the things that are paid, and who will benefit from this in the medium or long term. So is this path used for working in the forest, or is it used for getting faster to the next village or to the next bus stop or to next school? This also would make a difference in the impact to gender equality. And gender budgeting is intended to focus on the entire budget process. So it's important to have a look on the budget process and on the decision making. So we can ask questions: who decides on the distribution of resources? Are the processes transparent? And who has access to information and who receives information? So these three parts, I think, are very important when we look at gender responsive budgeting. And to summarize my last slide, the data analysis are probably up to now the largest output of gender responsive budgeting, not only in Austria, but also on EU level. But the actual goal of gender equality is, from my point of view, often forgotten, or it is reduced to just counting equal euros for men and women. So the realization of gender equality and gender justice, we must not lose sight of this goal. And for that, we need to have a view that goes beyond this binary category of gender. So, does this? So it's often the case that we can, with just counting men and women, also have this danger of reproducing gender stereotypes, as we have seen it in the last 20 or 30 years with gender mainstreaming activities, when gender is simply understood as man and woman, and the target should be 50% representation of each of these two groups, then it can happen that we reproduce these gender stereotypes. So as part of the goal-orientated and impact-orientated budget distribution in Austria, very extensive monitoring instruments were developed. This can also help to record the effectiveness of gender mainstreaming, because in the early days of gender mainstreaming, gender budgeting was also referred to as a centerpiece of gender mainstreaming. So we can combine these two strategies. And in my view, it's important that there is a real expansion of the traditional budget process. And that means that participation and transparency are required and promoted. Two aspects that are generally considered necessary to greater justice and thus also to gender equality, but maybe rarely desired by those in power. So gender budgeting offers a great opportunity as an analysis tool and also as a planning and monitoring tool. But we have to apply a clear feminist perspective. And in our case, also with a small-scale farmer's perspective or common good perspective, it can expose injustices and change policies. And if I may add one more point, then I would like to remind you of early gender budgeting initiatives that have always called for time use studies as well, because a feminist view on economies and work also focuses on unpaid work. And this aspect can also be important in the smallholder environment, where we rarely find regulated working hours and do a lot of care work. And this care work in a broader sense, based on agroecological principles, so caring for people, for animals, but also for food, for nature, for environment, and for a good life for all, for buen vivir. So thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to discuss more of these aspects.
Thank you, Kirsten. That was a lot of food for thought, and I appreciated your focus on education, on schools, and also the call to move beyond the binary. That's something that's critical as we move forward. And also highlighting the differences that exist on smaller scale farms when it comes to work and labor. I think you managed to show very nicely how GRB can be a really important tool to uncover inequalities, but reminded us that there are different approaches to GRB, and what we measure and how we measure it matters, no? And I think also your call to make sure that we center gender equality, that we don't lose sight of that as the goal, is really welcome. And with that in mind, I'd like to ask all of our speakers to join me in a bit of a discussion. So I guess you can all unmute. We have a couple of questions prepared, but we'd also like to ask our audience members to put their questions in the chat, and we'll try and curate those and ensure that we can answer as many as we can. So panelists, thank you so much. We already discussed how critical this particular moment is in EU policy making, and we have this opening now, or this push, maybe not even an opening, but an advancement around gender budgeting. But of course, we need to be strategic and we need to keep the pressure on, no? And I want to know from your perspectives, where do you see the key spaces or key opportunities are for having impact when it comes to pushing for more gender equitable budgets and maybe gender equitable policies? Are there particular areas, policy domains where you think we could have the most influence, or where we could be targeting our advocacy and action? I don't know who wants to go first. I can open up the floor to whoever. Who would like to kick off our discussion. Elena, please.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to all other speakers, Louise, Kerstin, Tania. It has been very insightful for me. I took notes from the presentation of you all, and it's really helpful for me because we are now preparing the next MFF, which we want to have even better when it comes to the gender equality. So it was very useful, and I take lessons in a humble manner, and I will pass the messages also to my colleagues so that we think about it and that we bear this in mind, because you are the real experts on the ground who implement those important policies. Well, from my perspective, Jessica, you ask what area would be the kind of priority area where we should focus our efforts when it comes to gender equality. For those who know me and who have experienced me in several events that we had on this important topic, I always say that for me, gender equality, or in this case, equality for women, because women are disadvantaged when it comes to common agriculture policy, and when we look at the indicators in terms of their participation in farming and rural economy and across all the agri-food chains, they speak the same language. Women are disadvantaged in all member states, and here where we should concentrate our efforts. Well, first of all, we should concentrate our efforts where it makes sense to concentrate the efforts. It's from the EU perspective. For example, when it comes to farming, access to land, it's very difficult to take an action there, because we do not have competence when it comes to land management. We will have EU observatory when it comes to the land, so we will have more information on that, but it's not really our competence. What I think where it makes sense is there are two areas where I always would like to focus. First area is the access to money, because if you have access to money, to finance, then you are empowered. You can start running a business. You can perhaps establish a farm, or you can expand farming activities. You can diversify more easily. And we know from the evidence that the banks are much more reluctant when it comes to providing the loans to women. For example, there is a report from Germany that I have recently read that banks are, even though women are more reliable when it comes to paying back the loans, they still are disadvantaged. And even when they seek financial counseling at the banks, at financial institutions, they are confronted with gender-biased approaches. So I think when it comes to financial management, financial counseling, access to loans, we need to improve the gender attitude and the mindset around that. So we have to work with financial institutions, but we also have to work with women. Perhaps we need to strengthen the counseling services for women, but also for those who are giving those loans in financial institutions. We are already working together, for example, with the European Investment Bank on that very topic. So this is the first thing, the first area. And the second area is, and I think my colleagues who have presented today would agree with me, it is really indeed about representation of women in decision-making positions. I mean, if we want true gender equality, we need more women on decision-making tables. They should be able to decide. They should be part of the decision-making. Because when we have more women, we have the perspective of women, and there the gender differences diminish to greater extent. So this is from my side.
Thank you, Elena. Do other panelists want to add?
I can go if you want.
Please, Louise.
I had in mind something more specific. So often, because it's not legally binding to address gender inequalities, then it's not done. And there is that proposal from the Commission for the next MFF on budget expenditure tracking. And so it would be interesting to make it legally binding, to make sure that no intervention have a negative impact on gender equality. And also, I think you talked about it, Elena, but make sure that there is a mean to check if there is compliance with the obligation. So that was one of the ideas I had in mind.
Thanks, Louise. Do others have a Kirsten?
Yes. I think these points mentioned by Elena are very important prerequisites for gender equality, the decision-making, more women in decision-making bodies, etc. And I think it's also important not only to look if the money is given to women or to men, but also to look who benefits from this money. And if we are talking, for example, about innovation, then we can also ask, are there technical innovations like machines or drones, artificial intelligence, or more big buildings financed? Or are there social innovations financed, like community-supported agriculture, or kind of, in Austria, it's green care, like nursing care, school, or holiday on a farm, or maybe new strategies for direct marketing, where many people in the region will benefit from. And also, maybe more women will benefit from these innovations. So this, I think, is also important if you look with a gender perspective on budget or budgeting processes and financed projects.
Thank you. All very helpful. Tania, for our next question.
Me gustaría también añadir, bueno, de acuerdo con todo lo que han comentado las compañeras, que está dentro de las prioridades que también teníamos identificadas, por añadir alguna más, intentar analizar más las interrelaciones que pueda haber, que pueden estar limitando el acceso de mujeres a distintas cuestiones que pueden determinar también la rentabilidad, como ha comentado Elena, la financiación, pero también otros factores productivos como acceso a tierras, ellas acceden en menor medida a arrendamientos, también otras cuestiones como factores que pueden determinar la productividad, como en nuestro país la superficie de regadío está mayor, o sea, se ve una limitación del acceso a mujeres a distintos factores. Entonces, analizar qué puede estar, o sea, qué puede promover eso en mayor profundidad para poder intentar diseñar las medidas más ajustadas. Y luego también, aparte de la mayor representación de mujeres, que es clave, también hemos visto cuando entran mujeres en toma de decisión, cambian muchas veces formas de funcionamiento. También implicar al resto muchas veces también al conjunto, o sea, que sea algo transversal a la igualdad y que se traten en distintos foros, porque si no, al final, bueno, para poder llegar mejor, o sea, porque muchas veces también cuando vamos a hablar de actuaciones para mujeres sobre mujeres, siempre hablamos y los interlocutores suelen ser mujeres. Entonces, un poco intentar que también los interlocutores sean, en el sector me refiero, también llegar a todos.
Thank you, Tania. That's a really important point. I think many of the questions I'd prepared have already been answered through your presentations and also through this discussion, and we have quite a lively chat. So I'd like to ask Isabel from Galicia to ask her question, which relates to the recognition of inequality indicators and the possible opportunities to make these binding criteria. Isabel, would you like to ask your question? I think you'll speak in Spanish, please.
Hola, muchas gracias. Bueno, yo soy Isabel Vilalba, soy campesina de Galicia y parte de CVC. Por una parte, los derechos históricos que se basan en referencias que ya tienen 20 años o más, pues vemos cada día cómo limitan el acceso en términos de igualdad, sobre todo de las mujeres y de las personas jóvenes. Después, en nuestra realidad, vemos que los proyectos que son pues, de agricultura ecológica, más diversificados, que hacemos transformación en las granjas, orientados al mercado local, precisamente por tener menos superficie, también son muy penalizados y dejan a muchas mujeres sin ayuda, sin acceso a las ayudas. Y claro, nuestra pregunta o el reto que creemos que es importante es, una vez reconocidos los indicadores que nos parecen muy importantes y bueno, felicitamos este camino, creemos que puede llevar a muchas mejores y a corregir esas desigualdades. La siguiente pata es pues cambio de criterios y que sean vinculantes, ¿no? Un marco jurídico vinculante para eliminar esas desigualdades. Y para nosotros vemos que si el criterio sigue siendo solo la dimensión o mayoritariamente la dimensión, superficie, número de animales, pues vamos a seguir en este marco de desigualdad. Es un poco lo que queremos traer aquí y cómo veis ese cambio del marco jurídico una vez diagnosticada esas dificultades de las mujeres. Muchas gracias, ha sido muy interesante.
Thank you so much for your intervention. It's a big question. Who on our panel would like to start? The question of legal binding and framing these questions of inequality. Or, yes, Elena, maybe also examples or best practices we've seen elsewhere would be helpful. Thank you. Go take the floor, Elena.
Well, thank you very much for this good question. First of all, we have legally binding obligations towards member states. They have to analyze interventions and they have to assign the score to each intervention, whether it's 0, 1, or 2, depending whether it's going to be an intervention with a specific focus on gender equality, or if it will contribute to enhancement of gender equality, or it has no impact on gender equality. This is legal obligation for member states. Member states also have the legal obligation, obviously, to prepare the national regional partnership programs, and the Commission will assess those programs and will remain in a dialogue with member states until we reach the point that the programs are acceptable. And gender equality will be part of those negotiations and these technical meetings. We have not introduced under the Common Agricultural Policy specific ring fencing when it comes to the allocation of budget for women farmers. And why we haven't done so? Because member states, this is the very logic of the new MFF and the national regional partnership programs, will design those programs in cooperation with the relevant stakeholders, including regional, including local actors, and they know the best what is where the problems for their member state are. And we have trust in stakeholders, including the organizations representing the interests of women, that they will be in dialogue with member states and they will point to the specific problem in each member state. This is how we understand and we value the principle of subsidiarity, that member states know very well, and especially when it comes to the local level, regional levels, where the problems are. And the beauty about these national regional partnership programs is that they are going to take a very cohesive approach, a holistic approach. Before we had fragmented way of working. We had European Regional Development Fund, for example. We had European Social Fund Plus, Common Agriculture Policy, including both pillars. And we had gender equality, which was scattered across all the possible instruments. Now we will have this common approach, holistic approach under these big national regional partnership programs, where we look how gender equality is being implemented, how they are going to go about it. So we have the legal obligations, which are anchored in the performance regulation, but we do not allocate or we do not request a specific allocation for gender equality under specific chapters, because this would undermine this universal principle of gender equality and the principle of really giving the member states the responsibility and also freedom to decide what best fits their challenges. But having this very strict performance framework, we will be able to track the expenditure, and using the OECD gender budget tracking methodology, member states will be confronted with providing the justification for designing the interventions from gender equality perspective, which is a novelty, which was not the case to such an extent in the previous programming periods.
Thank you, Elena. Do other panelists want to come in? Maybe also just to remind you, the second part of Isabel's question related to the moving away or the change in relation to area-based payments or payments on the number of livestock, and what the impact of this could be on women farmers and small-scale farmers more generally, if panelists had thoughts here. Louise?
Yeah, I don't have a clear answer on how we should move away from hectare-based payment, because I think it's discussions we have had in policy dialogues, but the solution still has to be imagined. But linked to that, I wanted to highlight something that is also linked to something Kirsten presented, that you have direct and indirect impact on gender, and that at first glance you might think that we need to increase the allocation of CAP money to women. But when they did it in Spain, as you presented, Tania, I know some farmers from the project who have smaller farms, they said that they were still discriminated because it was based on the amount of hectares you have. And so what we were thinking during the dialogues and discussions we had in the project is that sometimes, for example, if you have an intervention on how to better support agroecological farms or smaller farms, it can have an indirect impact on women. And sometimes it's more relevant to have that kind of interventions or working on fair prices than to target women, even though it's an interesting first step, because it forces us to see where the gaps are and to collect data. But it's not directly answering to the question, but that's an idea to help answer.
Thanks, Louise. I'm going to move back to the chat. We had a question from Joanna. Joe, if you want to open your mic. I think this relates to the legal commitments and human rights frameworks. Joe, are you there? If not, I can read out the question. Okay, I don't hear Joe, but Joe's question in the chat are related to binding legal commitments that all EU members have made under CEDAW, the Convention, and other human rights instruments, and yet they rarely seem to be integrated into our evaluation frameworks or within GRB processes. So does anyone, I don't know if anyone here has any insights on, we talked about the importance of horizontality and alignment, but are there concrete efforts to try and align what's happening in the human rights-based frameworks with these regulatory and tracking methodologies? I don't know if anyone has insights here. No? Well, but something for us to think about, certainly. I think, Joe, that's something that we're working on in the SWIFT project.
But
Kristen?
maybe one more, this could relate to the question, but I think it's important to question what picture of gender equality or gender justice we have in mind when we rate these performance ratings. Is something gender related or not? Do we have the picture that women should have the same big farms as men have? Or do we promote the way women do the farming? And this is the bigger picture of gender equality, or the bigger picture of how should agriculture look in future. And yeah, it's not only about that women should do the same as men do now.
Thank you, Kirsten. Elena, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for the very valid point. I agree with Kirsten. This is a valid point. And well, our compass for gender equality is obviously anchored in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is part of the European Union legal order. And for example, the Charter of Fundamental Rights calls for a possibility of positive discrimination in the sectors where women or men are underrepresented. When one of the sexes is underrepresented, then we are allowed to implement the actions of positive discrimination. This is what Charter of Fundamental Rights is very clear about from the rights-based perspective, right? When we talk about, we're not about economic, we are not talking about economic factors that are extremely important too, because women make up more than half of the population, and that is also an economic issue. But when we talk only about the rights-based perspective, and we talk about United Nations rights-based agenda, we do not view, and I do not view that it is about the same. Women should have the same as men. How do you measure that? I mean, if women are, let's say, underrepresented in agricultural sector, what does it mean? Am I going to give them the equal support as I give men? No, I'm going to give women accelerated support, enhanced support. I'm going to give women tailor-made support, person-centered support. Not the same, because women are not the same and not equal to men. We are different. So I need to differentiate and provide the support that women need. And this is precisely when we talk about gender-sensitive approach. It's about giving the approach and support that is needed to this particular group or this particular woman. This is what is it about. This is what makes it difficult. It's not about the same. It's about person-centered. It's about adopted to the needs of women, adopted to the needs of men. For example, we have a problem with mental health in agriculture, and we have a disproportional number of men farmers who are committing suicide compared to women. Am I going to give the same counseling support to men as I give to women? No, because men function differently already from physiological point of view. So I think it is not about the giving same support. It's about this rights-based approach translates into women should have a possibility. They should have the means. If they want to thrive, if they want to engage in agricultural activities, in farming activities, in rural economy activities, they should get the support. They should not be prevented from getting the resources that are needed. And how do I get these resources? I have to make it in a gender-sensitive manner. And the outcome should not be, well, we want to have the same amount of women and the same amount of farms. No, we have to see where the interest of women is and how we can accompany them. How can we cater for this? so that they can thrive the way they want to thrive. What tools do they need so that they can be successful and they can enjoy what they want to enjoy in terms of farming and in terms of rural economy. So this is how I understand it. And this is not the same, right? It's like when you have children, they are different, and you cannot give the same support to your children. One child needs more of that, one child needs more of that, and you have to see what fits the needs of this child.
Thank you, Elena. I also want to thank you for bringing in that this is more than just a women question. No, we really need to think around gender and also make sure that we see and include men and recognize, differences there. We have a final question before we wrap up. It comes from Guna in the chat, who writes that there are clear numeric targets for environmental objectives in the new MFF proposal, but not for gender equality. What does it mean that gender equality is put under the target of 14% of the social policy target? Or gender equality has no target at all, in which case it's not clear how we can encourage member states to do something about it. Don't know if people have questions here, comments here. So indeed, can we think about clear targets for gender equality in the way we have around environmental objectives, the way that Spain, I think, has thought about it? Elena.
I'm going to be very quickly. I don't want to take the floor and monopolize the discussion here. I just want to make sure that gender equality features as a horizontal objective. It is a horizontal principle. Not only, we have 14% target for the social objectives, but gender equality is horizontal. It is the objective for all programs and interventions, right? So, and we have not introduced ring fencing for the reasons I have already talked about and have referred to. And it is really at the horizontal level, which elevates the cause of gender equality to an extent which is much higher and much bigger than was the case in the previous programming periods.
Thank you. So we are running out of time. I have one final sort of rapid fire question for the panel. There is a risk, and we've talked about this, right? That GRB can become, that gender becomes just a variable, but we know that gender is much more than just a variable, and you've all spoken to that today. As a final question, very briefly, what is one key action that you can recommend to support gender transformative policies, also to complement GRB and help us advance a more gender equitable agricultural landscape? So maybe I start with Kirsten. Could you give us your insights as we wrap up?
Okay. I think it's very important to be careful that traditional gender roles are not reproduced, and that we're not talking about the woman and the man, but we can talk about all genders and what they need. And then we can have a look, as I mentioned before, what picture of agriculture, of life do we have for the future? And also that the money for gender equality does not necessarily have to be paid to women. I'm happy about that mental health example from Elena, and it's also like the example we can support gender equality when men receive money for childcare. It's also a very simple example. So, and keep in mind that gender responsive budgeting should be done in addition to specific measures to promote women or further trainings and network opportunities. And we need this more transparency and more participation in the budget process.
Thank you. And we are running out of time. So very, very briefly, Tania, do you have a few words to add?
Sí, bueno, yo creo que ya lo han comentado mis compañeras, pero yo destacaría como clave para el tema del análisis. Al final el análisis, todo lo posible, hacer análisis lo más completos posibles y que pues para intentar identificar realmente las interrelaciones entre los distintos factores y demás.
Thank you, Tania. Elena, final words?
Well, I would say that for me, the most important is, and the most difficult thing is to change the mindset, the culture, the perceptions. Because these perceptions of certain roles that women have in the society and in agriculture, and certain roles that men play in society and agriculture. When it was not my idea, but I was at one event, and one women farmer told me that she was visiting a school, and then the children were supposed to draw a picture of a farmer. And all of them drew a picture of a man farmer, not a woman farmer. A woman farmer did not feature on any of these pictures. So how do we get there that to shape the mind also on future generations? I think we need to start at schools to confront gender stereotypes in education, but also we need to get more men on board. Because every time we speak in the events like today, we have women around. Today, we are 5 of us panelists that we are talking to one another. And again, we are all women. We need to get more men on board. We need to get out of our usual cycle of all these women who agree. We need to get on board people working in agri-food industry, financial institution, and we need men, and we need to engage them, and we need to do more work on those who are not very sure that gender equality is a problem and that we need to do something about it.
Thank you, Elena. And briefly, Louise, your last words?
Yeah, I agree with Elena. Make gender inequalities so visible that it cannot be questioned anymore, and also more radically transform the food systems as a whole in parallel to addressing gender inequalities.
Thank you, Louise. I want to wrap up by thanking all of the panelists for their insightful and open discussion. Also to ECVC for hosting this webinar. To all of you who asked questions, we'll be capturing these questions and continuing to work on them. I want to thank the interpreters for their excellent work. And as a final closing note, we are in the SWIFT project developing a decision support tool, and it will be starting to incorporate answers and insights, data related to many of the questions that were asked today. You can see the website here, feministagroecology.com. It's coming soon, but in the meantime, if you want to answer some of these questions, we'd love to hear from you. So what do you think we need to talk about when it comes to gender equality in farming? There's 3 simple questions just to get your insights, your feedback. And we want to plug that we have just launched, in collaboration with many other partners, a conference that will happen in Brussels, December 2 to 4. It's free. It's called Sowing Livable Presence. It will bring together agroecology and feminist movements from around the world to discuss this and many, many other topics. So you can find information here. We encourage you to share it with your networks. It's going to be a civil society, scholar activist-driven, practitioner-driven event. And we really look forward to diverse participation and engagement, bringing together, farmers as well, I forgot to mention. So we thank you again for your participation, and we look forward to continuing this debate, this dialogue, and pushing for more gender transformative agricultural policies, starting now. No? Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your participation. Thanks, everyone.
Merci.
And apologies to those whose questions we could not answer. There were very, very many.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Mm.